Hi guys, the Metal Maniac back again, and in this video, I'm going to be listing off 10 albums I will never review. Now, these 10 albums are albums that I just absolutely can't stand, albums that I just really don't like. Yeah. Also, these 10 albums aren't in any particular order. They're just 10 albums I hate or don't like at all that I just refuse to ever review. But yeah, so with that, let's begin. First off is one that is a pretty controversial pick, considering that most people do really love this album. I know I'm in the minority. I just don't like it one bit. I think it's pretty bad. And that's Cowboys from Hell by Pantera. Yes, again, I know like 98% of metal fans love that album. I don't. I think it's the worst Pantera album and a very shitty album. Now, I could have easily put every single 90s Pantera album on this list, but, you know, I won't because, that's cheating, and yeah, I just don't like 90s Pantera. I think it's horrible. But Cowboys from Hell, I think, is their worst album. The instrumentation is sloppy, the production is an absolute mess, and the vocals are just horrendous. Yeah, I just don't like it. I absolutely hate it. Now, Pantera also is a band that just refuses to, acknowledge their earlier works, their 80s stuff. Their 80s stuff is really good, but, they sort of hopped on the 90s wagon of tough guy, sort of dated 90s tough guy act, and put that stuff, implemented that kind of, mentality into their music in the 90s, and it just was terrible. But yeah, Cowboys from Hell is their worst one, and I think it's a really shitty album. But yeah, I just can't stand that album, and I will never, ever review it. Next up is another controversial one, another one that I'm in the minority of. Most people love this album. I can't stand it. And that is the live album, Judas Priest, Unleashed in the East. In my opinion, it's the most overrated live album in all of metal. Like, I don't think it's. Here's the thing. With this particular album, I don't think it's technically a bad album, but I do find it to be extremely boring and just an aggravating thing to try to get through. Yeah, I think Judas Priest, the 70s stuff that Judas Priest did is their worst stuff, for the most part. I think it's just absolutely boring, except for maybe like 3 songs. But yeah, Unleashed in the East is an extremely overrated live album, and in my opinion, the most overrated live album in all of metal. Just extremely boring, and I don't hate it because it's boring. I hate it because so many people praise this album as the best live album in all of metal, or one of the best, and it's just gotten this ridiculously high status that it just doesn't deserve because it's not that good. But yeah, Judas Priest Unleashed in the East is another one that I just hate, that I will never ever review. Alright, next up is, the 1996 album, Promise by Massacre. This one, I'm actually in the majority of, this time. A lot of people don't like this album. I'm one of them. Massacre, here's the thing though. Massacre released their first, full-length album, From Beyond, and it's an absolute death metal classic. And after that, they released an EP, soon after, but their second full-length studio album, Promise, it doesn't sound like a Massacre album, and even more, it doesn't sound like a death metal album at all. It sounds like the best way I could describe it is 90s emo metal type thing. That's really the best way I could describe it. I know it's a very weird description, but you know, it is a very weird album. Hell, this album is so bad that Cam Lee, the vocalist for Massacre, left. He left because of how bad it was and probably how embarrassed he was that the album turned out so poorly. But yeah, it's just really bad, really weird, and just an absolute disappointment. Considering that Massacre's first album was amazing. But yeah, it's just another one I will never review. Next up is, again, another one that most people really like. I absolutely don't like it, and that's Fabulous Disaster by Exodus. Now, most Exodus albums aren't bad. Like, I'm not going to spoil anything, because I will do reviews of other ones, and, you know, eventually I'll do an Exodus ranking. But I will say that most Exodus albums aren't bad. Some are more memorable than others, but Fabulous Disaster, and maybe like one more, but like Fabulous Disaster in particular is just so bad. It's actually the reason why I just didn't check out, you know, anything else from Exodus for a long time, because I was just so put off by that album. The instrumentation is, again, just like with Cowboys from Hell, very sloppy. The production's paper thin, and it's just a very boring and aggravating listen to get through. It's just something that I was like, holy shit, this is Exodus? People were hyping this up and hyping this up. Like, at that point, I was like hearing so much good things about Exodus. And then I listened to Fabulous Disaster, and the first thing I ever hear from Exodus, and I'm like, what the hell is this? This is a really terrible album. But yeah, you know, again, later down the line, I listened to Bonded by Blood, and I was absolutely blown away. Love that album. So yeah, Fabulous Disaster is just something that it was unfortunate it was very unfortunate that that was the very first thing by the band that I ever heard, because it's just so bad. But yeah, it's another album that's just really bad, and I refuse to ever review it. Next up is the album No One Gets Out by Halloween. I've said this in a previous video. I don't think Halloween has released that many bad albums. In fact, I would say that No One Gets Out is probably their only bad album. Now, there's multiple reasons in why this album turned out so poorly. One of the main reasons is that the album wasn't even supposed to exist in the first place. Like, okay, so Halloween released their first album, their debut album in 1985, Don't Meddle with Evil. And then around the time of, sometime in 1986, they were getting ready to record their second album. They recorded, less than a handful of songs. I think like three songs, I believe. And then at that point, for one reason or another, the band broke up as they were beginning to record songs for the second album. But here's the thing: their third album, Victims of the Night, was actually supposed to be their second album. So that's kind of weird. When you hear Victims of the Night compared to No One Gets Out, No One Gets Out sounds like it would be later in their discography. Victims of the Night does sound like something that would be their second album instead of, their third or something like that. But yeah, No One Gets Out wasn't even supposed to happen. Like, that album was not even supposed to exist in the first place. It was sort of a last-minute thing. The band got back together sometime in the early 90s. Like, half of the band did. There's 4 band members going through their, history. Their 2 original members got back, but then they had to get 2 new guys because the other 2 guys didn't want to come back for whatever reason. But yeah, No One Gets Out. Very boring, very bland, and again, it was just something thrown together at the last minute because it wasn't even supposed to happen. It was an album that, a different album was supposed to be in its place originally. In fact, the song Candles from their fourth album, Horrorfire, was actually a song originally recorded for Victims of the Night, which again was supposed to be their second album. But yeah, it's just an unfortunate thing that it was pretty much something that wasn't even supposed to exist in the first place, but just happened because of unfortunate circumstances that sort of plagued the production of what was originally supposed to be their second album. But yeah, it's just pretty. Although it is very bad, and it's one again I will never review. Next up is one that, most people don't like, and I'm, one of them. The next up is the album Abigail 2, The Revenge by King Diamond. Now, I don't think the instrumentation or vocals are bad at all. In fact, I think they're the best things about this album. But what really makes me hate this album is the fucking story. The story pisses me off to no end. Now, the reason why, well, one, this album it didn't need to be made in the first place. Like, the first Abigail album wrapped up that story very well. It ended when it was supposed to, and I think it was just, a one and done thing. It didn't need a sequel. It wasn't meant to have a sequel. But they, for some reason, King Diamond and the rest of the band members thought it would be a good idea to make a sequel to something that was already a closed, story, something that already had an official end, at the end of the album, didn't need anything more to it. Another reason why this album really sucks in terms of story, it's just the direction they decided to go with it, and the continuity they just absolutely threw out the window that was set up with the first Abigail album. Yeah, I mean, first off, you have the character of Jonathan. So many things wrong with him in this particular album. First off, how the fuck is he alive? Jonathan, in the first album, near the end, dies. He dies at the end of the story. He falls down the stairs, breaks his neck, and dies. How the hell is he alive in the second album? Again, very, very glaring continuity error. Something that doesn't really make any sense. Another thing that doesn't make sense is how Jonathan, for some stupid reason, is the villain of this one. He was the hero, the main protagonist of the first album, and, why the hell is he the villain here? I mean, it contradicts his, character and, what, his personality and whatever that was set up in the story of the first one. Yeah, his personality wasn't really in-depth or anything. He didn't really go super in-depth of the character in himself. But just from what we got in the first one, he doesn't really seem like the person who would just randomly decide to just become an evil, person later on. Yeah, in the second album, he's grieving because he lost his wife, but that doesn't really add up to what he would or wouldn't do in terms of what's presented. He does in the second album. He just becomes this evil, horrible, just nasty individual that does all these really evil things, which again doesn't really add up with the character that was portrayed in the first album. Yeah, continuity error in terms of he's not even supposed to be alive, and for some stupid reason they made him the villain. To sort of, kind of get a reference to, something else that's kind of like that in terms of character, not being evil in the first thing, but in the second thing being evil for no bizarre reason. RoboCop, the guy called the Old Man, the boss of the OCP in the first movie. Now, he's not, the main protagonist or anything, but he's not an evil guy. He's, just a random businessman that, unfortunately has a guy in his business that is, evil and just doing all this, messed up crap. But in the second one, he's evil for no reason. The old guy in the second RoboCop, no reason at all, but he's evil. He's the mastermind, the evil mastermind in the second one for no apparent reason. And the fact that it's just, it contradicts to how he was in the first movie. Kind of like with Jonathan in the second Abigail album. He was a good guy in the first one. For no reason, he's a good guy in the for no reason, he's a bad guy in the second one. Just the continuity is just all over the place, just scattered, just broken. Another thing about the story I absolutely hate about, the second Abigail one, the continuity that doesn't make any sense again, is that there's three Abigails. Three Abigails! You have the original, corpse of the original Abigail, from the first one, which, makes sense. You have the ghost of Abigail, which, again, makes sense. But then you have a reincarnated version of Abigail that doesn't make sense. It's just an absolute mess. The story pisses me off because of what they do with the character of Jonathan, and the fact that he's not even supposed to be alive in the second one. Again, he dies at the end of the first one. So, yeah, it's just an absolute mess. The story pisses me off, and how they just basically throw away everything that was, all the story elements that, were in the first one. But yeah, it's just an absolute mess, and just didn't need to be made, and it's just something that really pisses me off. Abigail 2 The Revenge, I will never do a review of that album, and you bet when I do a ranking of the King Diamond albums, that's going to be, Abigail The Revenge is going to be the bottom of the barrel, the worst album. But yeah. Anyway, let me flip the list over really quick. Alright. Next up is the album Demonic by Testament. Now, I'm not a huge Testament fan. I think their first album, The Legacy, is an amazing, classic thrash metal album. But the rest of their stuff, again, I'm not a fan of, especially, their later 90s stuff. But Demonic is just one that, out of any album, I just absolutely hate. They tried to go a little bit towards death metal with this one, but again, I've said this in the past, it clearly shows that they didn't go away because they were too afraid to totally leave the thrash metal style, because they were afraid of possible backlash from the fans, of them hating on them for going death metal. So they didn't, they just dabbed a little bit in death metal on the album, not too much and not full on, just a little teeny bits of, traces of deeper vocals and stuff and that here and there and all this other stuff. And it just turned out an album that just, was kind of veering towards death metal, but again, didn't actually go through with it all the way. And it's just one that's just an absolute mess and something that I just can't stand because of the inconsistency and the fact that they were going somewhere but were too afraid to go fully that direction. But yeah, it's very bad and I hate it and I will never review it. Alright, next up is the second Grim Reaper album, Fear No Evil. This album's just downright confusing and why it even exists in the first place and why the hell do they do what they did with this one. Look, sorry, not Rocky to Hell. See You in Hell, fantastic debut album, great album. They go from this to an absolute horrendous mess with Fear No Evil. It's just one of those things that all you can say is, what the hell happened? And what the hell is this? It's an album where, the songs are just very boring, but on top of that, a couple of these songs are just so weird, and then there's an intro to one of the songs that is just so, what the hell is going on? I'm not going to explain because I already, pretty much said. I'm not going to go in extreme detail about this album because I did mention a lot of it, in a different video. But I will say that, the songs are boring. There's some bizarrely just downright just questionable intros to certain songs in the terms of how just downright insanely bizarre they are, and it's just an album that is extreme disappointment and just a very odd and very weird and off-putting album overall. But yeah, I will never review it. Next up is Wasps. Probably their last very, I guess you could say, um, uh, pretty. How do I describe it? It's their last album where they went to the very, shock rock-esque kind of thing. But in this one, they go a little bit further into more of this, 90s, weird thing. This album is just flat out weird. Like, I kind of think that they were trying to go back to the more shock rock-esque style of their first album, but with a 90s new flair to it, and it just didn't work. It just turned out to be a very weird album, and just something that just doesn't hold up very well, and it's just so weird and off-putting to the point where I just really don't like it whatsoever, and I think it's just very stupid. But yeah. Oh, I forgot to tell you the name of the album. KFD. But yeah, that album just is so off-putting because of how bizarre and stupid it is. Yeah, it's just not good. Thankfully, they released a great album after that. Eldorado, I think, is a very, very, very underrated album. Great, great last 90s album for them. But yeah, the album before that, KFD, is absolutely atrocious. Next up, the last album I want to mention is the Morbid Angel album. Hold on, I have to look at this because the pronunciation is just very weird. Elude Divinium Insanus. This is the last Morbid Angel album to feature original singer David Vincent. He came back for this one, but left afterwards. Steve Tucker came back after that. Again, with a couple of these on this list, it's just an album that is just so downright bizarre and off-putting. Just an album that just was just it's an enigma. It's just so bizarre, off-putting, and just weird. It has some weird sort of musical style mix to it, like I guess it's like death metal, but also punk, industrial, and it's just a weird, strange combination of things that just don't work and just piss people off because David Vincent came back, which was exciting, but this album is a huge disappointment, because, people were expecting something great, because a lot of the David Vincent stuff, early on, in Morbid Angel, those albums range from good to great for the most part, for most people, too. So it was just an extreme disappointment that it just turned out to be just an absolute mess of an album, just something so weird and bizarre and just off-putting. But yeah, that's it. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.